If you asked me what possessed me to sign up as an exchange student for a year in northern Canada, I'd probably feed you some tired line about wanderlust or wanting to experience another culture. Truth is, my life back home wasn't terrible, just monotonous. I needed something different, something that might shake loose parts of myself that felt firmly embedded in the everyday. I signed the papers, packed my bags, and hopped a plane into what I foolishly considered adventure. I landed in a place that didn't appear on most maps, a sleepy town with a name that sounded like a whispered memory. My host family, the Murdochs, met me at the tiny airport. They were pale and polite in a way that seemed almost rehearsed, like actors playing their roles just a beat off tempo. Mr. Murdoch shook my hand with a grip that lingered just a second too long, his eyes searching mine as if he was measuring something I couldn't fathom. Mrs. Murdoch stood by with an unmoving pleasantness fixed on her face, the kind that told you she was smiling because it was expected. Their home, if it could be called that, looked like a cabin cobbled together from a collection of forgotten corners. It stood at the end of a gravel road that crunched underfoot like bones. A thick line of trees hemmed it in from all sides, tall and dark, sentinels against the ever-encroaching wilderness. Inside, the air was musty, infused with the smell of pine and something else, something sour and sad like decay. Mr. Murdoch watched me stake my territory in the small room they'd provided, his stare curving like a line he intended to reel back in. The first night, as I lay beneath heavy quilts that seemed more suited to smothering than warmth, I heard noises. Not the polite whisper of wind against windows, but a series of rhythmic creaks, almost like footsteps creeping across the attic above me. I chalked it up to the house settling, though I never believed that was something real houses did. Despite my attempts to convince myself, the sounds stayed with me, an unsettling accompaniment to the stillness of the remote country night. Breakfast the next morning proved equally unsettling. Mrs. Murdoch served bacon and eggs, overdone and unappealing, but beneath it lay something unfamiliar, texture soft yet oddly resistant. I couldn't place the taste, nor did I want to after one cautious bite. They watched as I downed each mouthful, their own plates untouched, eyes steady and expectant. I ate slowly, the food becoming heavier with their unbreakable gaze. When I finally scraped the last piece from my plate, they both smiled, a fleeting satisfaction warming their features. Days in the town were slow, the cold gnawing at skin and bone. My host family's reserved hospitality left me feeling like a guest on the edge of something much larger than I could see. The townspeople echoed this unsettlement. Some made a quiet effort to welcome me, but others maintained an uneasy distance, offering little more than curt nods or averted eyes as I passed. It wasn't the unfriendly reception that did it. Rather, it was the subtle sense everyone knew something I didn't, a whisper behind a curtain that stirred unease in my gut. As the isolation of the place seeped in like creeping frost, I found myself retreating inside my mind at times, spinning imagined scenarios and explanations for the undercurrent I sensed in everything around me. But that creeping sense of wrongness in the Murdoch's house was impossible to deny. The old wood creaked and breathed like a sleeping beast in those first weeks, my resolution crumbling under its weight. I began to keep count of how often the footsteps emerged, how many times they stopped directly above my bed, hanging like a guillotine over my restless nights. I knew then, beneath the surface of this quiet rural life, something was waiting, something inexplicably tied to the Murdochs, to that uneasy silence during breakfast, to the incremental dread growing heavier than the frigid northern air. And though curiosity waged war with common sense, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was would eventually become undeniable. A truth that, while currently hidden away, would emerge no matter how deeply buried. As the mysteries mounted, so too did the whims of darkness threatening to envelop me. I was determined to glimpse whatever hid behind those daily masks, even if it meant confronting a reality both strange and terrifying. I won't forget the night I decided to follow that urge. The town had turned into an unsettling stretch of silence, disturbed only by the wind's icy fingers brushing the trees. It was past midnight when I slipped out from under the coarse blanket and tiptoed through the creaky hallway, the shadows stretching long and thin, touching the edges of my imagination. The Murdoch house seemed alive, shifting and groaning like a restless sleeper. I paused at the top of the stairs, listening. Downstairs, just behind the kitchen, lay the cellar door, a place Mrs. Murdoch had forbidden me to enter. A faint, rhythmic thumping seemed to emanate from below, a sound I'd heard at odd hours, yet dismissed as the house settling. But now, in the sheer stillness of night, it beckoned with a chilling persistence. My stomach churned with something between anticipation and dread as I made my way down, each step matching the thump in the dark. The door to the cellar loomed before me, its wood warped with age, hinges rusted with disuse, or perhaps misuse. With a steadying breath, I turned the knob. It gave way with an unwilling groan. Cool, damp air rose to meet me, and I hesitated for a heartbeat before descending into the black mouth yawning below. The stairs creaked underfoot, dust rising around me in waves. I descended into a world where shadows reigned supreme, deeper and darker than any place I'd known. As I reached the bottom, my foot brushed against something soft and yielding. I bent down, my fingers running over cold, musty fabric, a sheet covering what felt like a stack of boxes. But it wasn't the boxes that held my attention. The thumping was louder now, a steady pulse in the air. My hands trembled as I fished the small flashlight from my pocket, its beam slicing through the oppressive dark. The cellar was cluttered with old furniture, draped in sheets, their ghostly forms looming around like sentinels. And there, in the far corner, was a door I hadn't seen during my hurried descent. It was locked with a thick chain, but each thump seemed to radiate from behind it, a sound so organic it set my teeth on edge. I moved closer, the light revealing scratches on the wood, the kind that might be made by nails, or something much sharper. My heart pounded in time with the noise. I tried the handle, but the metal was cold and unyielding, unmoving under my grip. I stood there listening, debating what to do next when suddenly a creak from upstairs shattered the moment. Panic surged, and I switched off the flashlight. I held my breath, straining to hear through the silence that followed. But the creaking didn't stop. It was no longer imaginary. Someone was moving above, footsteps slow and deliberate, traveling across the floor toward the stairs, toward me. I retreated into the shadows, squeezing myself into a narrow gap behind the stacked boxes. My skin prickled with fear. A sliver of light widened as the cellar door opened, and the footsteps descended, carrying with them the whisper of a familiar voice. It was Mr. Murdoch, murmuring to himself or perhaps to something else, a low, rhythmic chant that set my nerves alight with dread. He moved with practiced ease, as if navigating his own nightmares come to life. I watched, heart in my throat, as he approached the chained door, fishing a key from his pocket. For a moment, I dared not breathe. He was setting something free, or perhaps closing something in, as calm and determined as a man with a purpose. The chain unraveled with a metallic clatter, and with a firm grip, he opened the door just enough to step through. A faint light seeped out, outlining him in an eerie glow. What struck me, even more than the scene, was the unnatural stillness that followed. The thumping ceased, and the silence grew heavy with expectation. My legs screamed to move, to flee, but I remained rooted, fear coating my thoughts. Minutes ebbed into eternity before he reemerged, now cradling something wrapped in cloth, his expression unreadable in the half-light. He locked the door behind him, leaving whatever lay inside to the shadows once more. The thumping resumed almost immediately, accompanied now by a soft, unsettling whimper. I was so entranced by the scene, by the implications, that I failed to notice when he began retreating up the stairs. As soon as the door clicked shut above, I allowed myself to breathe, feeling the air burn in my lungs. Quietly, I eased from my hiding spot, the chill of the cellar still clawing at my skin. Returning to my room felt like swimming through a dream, or a nightmare from which I couldn't awaken. The next morning, the house was as it always had been, deceptive in its tranquility. The Murdochs behaved no differently, with their usual distant smiles and polite nods. Yet, nothing seemed ordinary anymore. I knew something sinister festered beneath the surface, shrouded in layers of polite conversation and mundane daily rituals. Each day I considered confronting Mr. Murdoch, asking what lay behind that locked door. But every time I met his gaze, those words died in my throat. He knew I'd seen. I could feel it in his measured looks, the subtle shifts in his demeanor. But as if by some unspoken agreement, we danced around the truth, each step calculated, neither willing to break the facade. The weight of knowledge bore down on me, a constant reminder of what lay hidden in the depths below. I found myself glancing toward the cellar more often, drawn by the mystery and the groan. Conviction that I wasn't the only one haunted by its secrets. The townspeople's sideways glances and hushed whispers hinted at their complicity, or perhaps their ignorance. Whatever the truth, I knew it was only a matter of time before it found its way to the light. And as certain as the sun's rise, I felt myself being drawn back to the cellar, to that locked door and the horrors it contained. I understood then, the real terror wasn't what I had seen, but what I had yet to discover, lurking just out of reach, biding its time. Things came to a head the night I decided I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I hovered at the top of the staircase, the house quiet around me. It was a suffocating silence that pressed against my ears, an oppressive contrast to the cacophony that sometimes leaked from the cellar below. I needed to know what Mr. Murdoch was doing down there, not out of curiosity anymore. Now it was necessity. Whatever I'd seen in that dark space, that mass of shadows performing rituals I couldn't comprehend, it clawed at my mind every waking hour. But that night, the house felt different. Every creak of the old wood seemed to shout warnings, but I shook them off as I moved quietly down the hall. The air was heavy, like it carried the weight of years of secrets, smothering and unbroken. When I reached the cellar door, it stood slightly ajar. I pulled a shaky breath into my lungs, pushing it open the rest of the way with trembling fingers. The darkness was a living thing, breathing and moving, curling in tendrils toward me like smoke. I fumbled for the light switch, but when my fingers slid over the cool metal, my heart dropped. It was already on. I had no choice but to press forward, my senses straining to pick up any hint of what lay ahead. The descent down the narrow stairway seemed to stretch on forever, and I stumbled over the last step, catching nothing but empty air as I reached out for balance. I fell against the cold cellar floor, the impact jarring and painfully loud. A whispered rustling echoed around me like 1,000 dry leaves caught in a sudden gust. My heart leapt and racing footsteps sounded in my ears. But there was no one else here. I was alone, or so I thought. In the dim, wavering glow from the one low-hanging bulb overhead, I saw them. Figures shadowed around the walls, frozen in mid-movement, grotesque statues formed of wood and ash. Their stillness stabbed through the cold with terrifying certainty. And as I blinked, I realized they weren't statues at all but husks, dried skins held upright by the whispers of some unholy power. It dawned on me in that awful moment that the Murdochs weren't just eccentric or sinister. They were the harbingers of something far, far worse. A creeping dread fastened around my ribs as my mind grappled with a realization that skirted the edges of insanity. The Murdochs were resting, they were waiting for a day I now feared was coming soon. The cellar was their temple, a gruesome place of worship, the hallowed ground for something else that lay beneath. All that time, it wasn't just Mr. Murdoch performing those rites. There was a presence that filled the room, something that watched me through those hollow eyes. Desperation clawed at my throat. There was no going back to comfort, no denying what I'd seen. Each item, every relic I discovered in the shadows told a story of binding and sacrifice, of rituals that felt ancient and damned. Suddenly, a sound, a low, guttural rumble, rose from beneath the floorboards, shaking the whole structure. It wasn't earthly, and my skin crawled with the certainty that whatever was stirring below was ravenous. The house moaned in response, its boards shrieking with strain as though stretching toward the echo of that monstrous call. I had to flee. I didn't care where, just away from the clawing dark, away from those statues. I stumbled back up the stairs, panic making my movements clumsy and frantic. As I hit the hallway, I could feel the darkness chasing me, tendrils licking at my heels, urging me forward. Through the front door, into the biting night air, the world outside seemed as alien as the house I fled. The town wasn't safe. Now I knew it never would be. For in the moment I took that first breath of freedom, the understanding seeped in. The Murdochs had been keeping something sealed beneath their home, and I had come dangerously close to unchaining it. What I wrestled with now wasn't just whether I could leave this behind. No, it was much worse. As I left that cursed house, a chill deeper than the wind settled into my bones. Whatever lay beneath the Murdoch cellar wasn't finished, and I was tied to it in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. I knew as I looked back at the dark silhouette of the house shrinking behind me that I could never escape it. Wherever I might try to run, that presence would follow, echoing in my dreams, lurking in reflections. The air would never feel clean again, not true. Lie not with knowing what lay just beneath the surface. In fleeing, I feared I had awoken something that would ripple far beyond that lonely house, a force waiting under an old town, behind the doors of a family who wore normalcy like a lie. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, a piece of a puzzle much larger, darker than I'd ever conceived. And so here I am, telling you this not for comfort, but to unburden a truth that festers like poison, a warning of sorts. Because the Murdochs only seemed like caretakers, what they guarded was far older, and now, perhaps, it stirred somewhere in the night, reaching for the world it had once known. As I left, I wondered, was this the horror, that it was never truly locked away?